Hi, guys, and welcome to yet another episode of the Jane Eyre podcast. Last week we had such a cliffhanger from chapter 25, and in this week, chapter 26 is on the menu. With me today is a very special guest in the studio. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello studio. My name is My name is Anders Crank, and I'm an expert in this amazing book, Jane Eyre. All right, let's get on with it.
Yes, Anders has read this book a million times.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna jump straight into it, Anders, because the setting in this chapter is the wedding going on between Mr. Rochester and Jane herself. What do you want to say about that?
All right, so yeah, this wedding's very interesting, and there are a couple things I wanna get into. So first of all, I want to talk about Mr. Rochester and how he behaves in this wedding because so Mr. Rochester, he's obviously a very high class man, and Jane Eyre, she's a governess, so lower class, right? But it is a high class wedding. But this wedding is very unusual compared to a high upper class wedding because usually the wedding is like one of the most important days of your life.
Yeah.
So of course it's going to be very prestigious if you have enough money to afford a very nice wedding. But in this case, Mr. Rochester just ignores all of that, and he just wants to hurry it along, just get it over with. So here we have an example of him trying to hurry it up. So he asks the clergyman and the carriage, the horses are harnessing. We shall not want it to go to church, but it must be ready the moment we return. All the boxes and luggage arranged and strapped on, and the coachman in his seat. So because the horses aren't ready to be because the horses aren't harnessed to the carriage to take them to the church, he just decides to walk to the church, which is very unusual for an upper class.
Yeah, that is very unusual. And when they actually arrive at the church, nothing is normal, if I may say so. What is different in the church as well?
Well, usually you would have, also for a normal wedding, not necessarily upper class, you would have a lot of relatives. But in this case, they are, virtually all alone. It's just the priest, Jane Eyre, and Mr. Rochester.
Exactly.
So, can you even call this a wedding at this point? It's not very, it doesn't look very much like a wedding.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So this is a very strange wedding going on in this chapter. Now, you talk a little about Mr. Rochester himself, and he is a very special man, and
Yes,
it
he
is
is.
very clearly seen in this chapter. So what do you want to say about himself, Mr. Rochester?
So so he is clearly, he isn't the main character, but everything that happens in the chapter revolves around him. So now I want to talk about Mr. Rochester, but more specifically, I want to focus on his relationship to Jane and how he acts when the wedding is canceled. So first of all, so Jane Eyre has apparently fallen in love with Mr. Rochester, and that's why they're getting married. They fall in love with each other, but Mr. Rochester doesn't really. It doesn't feel like he's expressing this because he doesn't talk to Jane Eyre like he loves him. He's hurrying her along. For example, here in the first quote, "Lingerer," he said, "my brain is on fire with impatience, and you tarry so long." So just because she was running a bit late with her preparation, he's trying to get her to hurry along, and it seems unhealthy for their relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty normal to be a little late when it's the wedding going on, right?
Exactly, especially for the woman.
Yes.
You've got a lot of things to do. Well, anyway, and then I want to talk about how he behaved when the wedding was canceled,
Yes.
which I would say is quite childish because he acts like it was outrageous. I guess.
I think childish is a very great word to use for his actions when the wedding is canceled.
Yeah.
He's not very adultish, if I may say so.
Exactly. He ignores the objection, tries to just say proceed. But then when he realizes that he's defeated, he goes over to the man who objects and almost strikes him. But in the movie, he actually starts strangling him. Which is something I want to tell.
We got some spoilers in here. Be ready, guys, for that one.
Sorry.
So, finally, I want to talk a little bit about the woman or the ex-wife of Mr. Rochester, which is Mrs. Bertha. We briefly hear about her or read about her in the text, and also in the movie we see her very shortly. What is special about her?
All right. So here we have the so-called off-cast mistress, as they call her in the book, but she is Mrs. Bertha Rochester. It is in fact Mr. Rochester's current wife, who he is trying to forget or trying to abandon by marrying Jane Eyre. But her problem is she is mentally unstable. She is clearly crazy, But the Victorian age view on crazy people is very different from what it is today. So they didn't recognize crazy people as human at back in the day, back in the Victorian age.
No, she's described like an animal.
Yeah, exactly. Like she's possessed by a demon.
Yes.
So it's not a problem they're trying to fix. They just try to cast her away, or cast her off to the side, but they don't kill her. But yes, then there's another problem I want to talk about because, the reason Mr. Rochester can't marry Jane Eyre is because he's still married to Mrs. Bertha Rochester. Yes. And then one would think, why can't he just divorce Mrs. Bertha Rochester and then marry Jane Eyre? Well, here's the problem. So here we've done some research and taken from this website called victorianera.org.
Yeah.
There had to be strong grounds for giving divorce. The only reason of divorce which was acceptable in the Victorian era was adultery. So Mr. Rochester has not, or Mrs. Bertha Rochester hasn't committed adultery, and therefore there are no grounds for him to divorce. And you could say that craziness is a strong ground for divorce, but they didn't see it like that. Like, they didn't perceive craziness as like a ground for divorce.
Yeah, and marriage was a big deal back then. I mean, this could really mess up your entire life if
Exactly.
you married the wrong person. So this chapter really includes a lot of different things. So give me a few words on how to sum up this chapter, talking about madness, gender roles, and class.
Yeah, these are clearly the main three topics of the chapter. So first of all, like I just said, with madness, they didn't recognize crazy people as human, and they would just cast them aside. And then there's a question about gender roles. Mr. Rochester is clearly more dominant than Jane Eyre in his way of acting, and Jane Eyre is a victim in this case.
Yeah.
But Mr. Rochester and just males in general in these stories, they're not very considerate of the women. Mr. Rochester is just dragging Jane Eyre all along throughout the whole chapter. So and then the final question about class, which is also tied to the gender roles. You could say, Mr. Rochester, everything's revolving around him because he's the upper class, but he doesn't seem very vernuftig.
Reasonable.
Reasonable, exactly. Thank you, Andreas.
You are so welcome, Andreas.
Yeah,
I think gender roles and class is just power in this chapter. And I would thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for next week's chapter 27. I can tell you it is going to be even more crazy than it was this week. Thank you very much to my special guest this week, Andreas, and I'll see you guys for the next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.